Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to all the viewers of Hilaal TV. My name is Fahraaz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on DSTV channel 347, and we hope and trust that you are having a good Youth Day. Many people would look on June the 16th, 1976 with horror, with disgust, and with sadness at what had happened on that day, when apartheid security police went into the townships of Soweto and gunned down many students on that day. It was the day that we saw the famous pictures of Hector Peterson and many more that were laid to the ground. It was for one thing and one thing only, the right for equal education, something which the National Party of the time had denied the majority of the black citizens of the country. We are now in the year 2025, and we are still asking the questions: does the youth still have a massive role to play? Does the youth still see itself as part of the future for South Africa? And is the youth having the access that it deserves as per the Constitution of South Africa? Let me welcome my guest today. To my far right, I'd like to welcome lawyer and activist Bilqees Akoodie, and to her right, I'd like to welcome Irfaan Mangera, who is a social and a political activist. He also is the head of education at the organization We the People. I'm going to start off with you, Bilqees. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for coming through here. Bilqees, when we talk about the youth of today, where is the youth in 2025 in South Africa?
Let me just preface by saying thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here for Youth Month. I think where the youth are at is that we are pretty disillusioned at the moment. We are also a very digital age, the first digital age, and we're faced with real world exclusion, but virtual visibility. And it's creating such a cognitive dissonance amongst the youth, being we're not represented in real life, but we're very visible online. And it creates a false sense of participation in real world affairs, in current affairs. So that's really where I think we're at, and it's just a place of confusion. But I think it's hopeful. There's the youth are still very much aware.
Place of confusion, Irfaan. First of all, assalamu alaikum to you. We finally have you on, so I'm glad that you are here. Irfaan, place of confusion, is this where the youth of South Africa are right now in the year 2025?
Firstly, wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here and to share the panel as well with Bilqees. One thing that I want to start by saying is that young people today in South Africa live with potential, but equally live with a promise deferred, because this democracy has been one that has achieved so much in 30 years, but has not achieved dignity and justice. And so we are still waiting for that promise, and we still have to work for that promise and make sure that it's a lived reality. Young people's confusion, I do get the sense, working in communities, that there is a sense of, on the one hand, I want to do something to change. I don't want this to be my lived reality where I'm unemployed or facing hunger. But on the other hand, it's also a scenario where you are continuously excluded. And it's by design that we've accepted that young people must still remain on the periphery of change. And that's the worry, is that the majority of this country and this continent is young, and yet it's those same demographic groups across particularly black communities and black women specifically, who are left out of progress. And so, yes, there is a sense of disillusionment setting in, but it hasn't stopped young people from taking action. And I say this because the view of young people being apathy, for example, is not one I share. I've seen the youth taking action against GBV, to fight against hunger, to protest in the streets. South Africa, the Constitution allows us to protest, and young people practice that constitutional right as a means to take forward part of the legacy and struggle from the youth of 1976.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on Fees Must Fall, because that, I mean, the organization in itself and the rise of it, you know, it's 10 years old already. Bilqees, the Constitution, it's a beautifully written piece of work that I think every South African holds dearly. And when you speak to those who were born in 1994, a lot of them want to learn about it, a lot of them want to understand it. But that exclusion from them being part of it, that is something when you speak to a lot of youth, they say, but why aren't we involved in really helping government understand our issues? And Irfaan mentions it there, the sidelining. And that is what the youth want, isn't it? They want to be involved in making sure that they are part and parcel of shaping the way South Africa is going to be in the future.
Well, I mean, the Constitution is, is supreme, and it's all encompassing.
Sure.
And when we talk about how the youth maybe feel that they were left out or excluded by previous generations in drafting the Constitution, in formulating the Constitution, how it's maybe not applicable to them, who maybe it's a matter of era, and that there was a different era and now we're in a new era, and perhaps they don't find it applicable. But the Constitution was made with the youth in mind. It was written with the youth in mind, and by the youth at the time.
Yes.
And so they were the youth. And now perhaps we've become a bit, we've lost hope a lot in our elders and those who are in power and who carry the mantle of the Constitution, having been part and parcel of its creation and upholding it. But we are represented in the Constitution. We can never say that we're not
not represented, yes. I think,
yeah,
I mean, that's the important part of it, is that, I mean, Bilqees brings up a valid point, that the youth is there, part of the Constitution. Of course, 1994, it's a different part. When 1996 comes, of course, the Constitution gets drafted. But the youth in itself are asking the question, where is the future for us going forward? Because the more they look at the ills, and we're going to be touching on youth unemployment in the next segment, they're always asking this, how can we be part of it? How can we play a more active role in it? And of course, organizations that you're part of, We the People, are trying to get into that gap to say, government, here we are, allow for this to happen.
Absolutely. And, you know, to piggyback off what Bilqees is saying, a lot of young people have misconceptions about this Constitution. And the one thing that I'm proud of is taking on this role to then debunk some of those misconceptions. This Constitution was created and was entrusted to 490 people who were elected to serve this country in the first democratic election. Those 490 people represented young, old, black, white, colored, Indian. Everyone who was in that parliament was entrusted through the Constitutional Assembly to then formulate this Constitution. And that was not just themselves. There were over 3 million, if I'm not mistaken, contributions by ordinary South Africans who said, we want this in there, we don't want this. And we helped shape this document. But again, this is just a document. It's the reality on the ground has to be, how do we enforce this document? How do we make sure we implement it so that it achieves its values of equality, of dignity? And we can shape that by instilling education and knowledge. And our theory of change certainly is that you empower young people with the knowledge and information they need, and therefore they'll take action on securing and applying their rights in their day-to-day lives. The scariest stat for me, though, is that 40% of South African youth didn't understand or know that there's this Constitution. 51% in the country technically only knows it. And so you have a situation where young people, a lot more, you're likely to find a young person who can't even name a Bill of Rights.
Yes.
And so that is a worry, because if you want to create change, you have to know what's in here that protects you, that actually protects your right to freedom, your right to your religious practice, to water, electricity, those basics that we take for granted. And I said the same thing on World Hunger Day on the 28th of May in Lenasia South, when we launched that campaign to say the Union Against Hunger is how we protect 20 million South Africans who are going hungry using the constitution as a basis because it says everyone should have access to food. And so this is why I think that we must look at this in a different way and in a manner where even ourselves challenge ourselves to go and learn sections that we don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't even give you all the content, but I can say that that's a good starting point because our elders, the leaders who fought for us, they were our age, and they said we need to do something and protect the future generations from the type of system that we had in the past.
After the break, we touch on youth unemployment. Currently, unemployment overall is sitting at 39.8% according to Statistics South Africa, but over 50% of it is youth. They want jobs, but is the state, is government, is the private sector going to allow for that gap? That 50% of that 39.8%, is that opportunity going to come for them? We'll speak about that after the break. Welcome back to this Youth Day panel discussion. I'm with Irfaan Mangera and Bilqees Akoodie. Irfaan, I want to start off with you. I think, when we were all in high school, the idea is you're going to get this beautiful education at a university and then you almost guaranteed a job. 2025, that idea that was sold so many years ago, it seems to be a dark reality because when you look at youth unemployment, it is very scary.
It's not just scary, it's unsustainable. Young people don't lack talent, we lack access. And we're not lazy, we've been locked out. This economy has not lived up to what our leaders in the earlier stages of this democracy promised it would be. And you're right about saying, particularly in education. I still remember there's a post. I had a poster at the Union Building lawns saying, you promised us the doors of freedom, the doors of education will be open for everyone, but we're here for the refund. And as somebody who comes from that fees must fall generation, it really had an impact on me because systemically, this thing is not working. What we currently have has locked out young people from accessing the capital they need to start businesses, the skills they need to enter into the workplace. There's complete mismatches around what the education system is producing and what people are left to go and fend for themselves in many ways. And I'll just highlight two important things. One, the school dropout rate alone should scare us because the more learners are dropping out of school before they finish matric than they are actually qualifying. And that's a worry because the economic system, at least accessing a job is easier, and not even easier, it's just better likelihood of you getting a job if you have a matric as a basis versus dropping out when you're in grade 9 or grade 8 or grade 7, which is happening for various social reasons, which I'm sure we'll cover soon. The second problem is you have 4 million young South Africans who are not in any form of employment and any form of education or training, which means there are 4 million people, young people, out there doing nothing. And it's not out of their own accord. I wish people stop this thing of saying, young people are lazy.
Yes.
How many times has that same young person gone and applied for a job and has been rejected? The cost of just finding a job, there's a research study that was done by an organization I've worked with that showcased that young people don't have the kind of money they need to just go and take the taxi, often 2 or 3 taxis, just to go and drop off a CV, let alone printing the CV because it costs money. That is a structural problem. It tells us that the system is not designed to actually help a young person transition from the education to actually getting a job and living a decent, dignified, and livable, earning a livable wage. And I think for me, those two problems sit with me every day. And when I go to sleep, it's the same problems that I sit with. How do we solve this? And I mean, we can speak solutions, but it really showcases that the entire transitionary framework has been designed in the most hideous way. And it's an unkind thing to expect a young person who comes from a rural area or who comes even from townships in Joburg to then expect them who get maybe 360 Rand a month to then think of whether I must apply for a job or put food on the table. How do you balance that?
And that's the thing, Bilqees, I want to bring you into this. So Irfaan mentioned solutions, which is important. You then have the public and the private sector playing the blame game. Well, private sector saying, government, you need to take control. Public sector saying, we can't absorb all of this youth. Private sector, you come into this. And having the PhD, having the masters alone does not guarantee you the job. You have doctors who are sitting at home who cannot go ahead and get the job. This blame game between public and private sector, it needs to end, because between the two of them, they both need to make a plan. They both need to find a way to absorb and eliminate this youth unemployment crisis we face in this country.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Fahraaz. When it comes to the private and public sector, I think they're both equally to blame. And broader society, community at large is to blame as well. And this goes back to our parents' generation, their parents' generation. It's just basically how we were socialized and how the system was created. Like Irfaan mentioned, you know, we're up against the system, and it was not meant for us to be set up for success. In the way that we were taught it was going to set us up for success by going to school. Even if you do everything right, you go to school, you try your best, and you're, well, in my case, a good girl. You try your best to be a good girl. You finish school, you apply for a tertiary education. I studied through UNITA because I thought I wanted to exclude all sort of social interactions, and that would be a distraction for me. And so that's what I did when I pursued my law degree. But it wasn't, time and time again, even when I graduated, I was hit up wall after wall. And you come up with, okay, you apply for positions you may be overqualified for. You apply for positions that maybe don't cover your cost of living or manage to support your dependents. And this is, even if you're an educated young person in South Africa, these are the issues that you're grappling with. Firstly, getting into tertiary education is a problem in itself. Finishing high school is a problem in itself when we have all of these other external factors. And you know, you touched on Fees Must Fall, and it's quite an interesting topic for me, because when Fees Must Fall happened, my parents had a pharmacy in Braamfontein.
Yes.
And during the riots, it was totally like demolished. Okay, the windows were broken, and we were trapped in the building. And because of Fees Must Fall, I lost my opportunity in education because my parents lost their business. And so I still felt so deeply involved in the movement. And I was like, but if it had been affordable in the first place,
Yes.
I wouldn't have had to see them hustle and struggle the way they did to put me through university. And then we're still dealing with prestige and which tertiary education do you get into. How it is a matter of status and a hierarchy of universities and tertiary education. And really, it's a lot for young people to deal with, a lot for them to grapple with. Yeah.
Irfaan, Fees Must Fall. And this is where I think we want to touch with regards to this, because I remember in 2015, I mean, Bilqees brings up that her parents' pharmacy in Braamfontein got affected by this. And unfortunately, the circumstance at the time creates this. But this is 1994. Got the ANC government coming in. They've made these promises. Surely they had to live up to it. And if they're not going to live up to it, find a way. Because the student coming from the township, coming from the rural area, who has been denied for the 60 years that apartheid had existed, all they're asking for is, government, allow me that education, but do not sell me false promises. Unfortunately, they've been sold the false promises, and as a result, the Fees Must Fall movement had come about.
Yeah. I mean, it was bound to happen, because if you continuously force an entire generation to be left to fend for themselves, who are saying this is our lives, this is our futures at stake, you know, resistance will by its nature, it's rife in that kind of condition. And so being part of Fees Must Fall, I had privilege, but not the amount of privilege where I could say everything was catered for. My parents also had to work to make sure I had to fund for my schooling. But it was one day getting off the bus from Lens and walking down to the students blocking the one entrance in the early days. And I remember telling Shaira this because it was them that I met there.
Yes.
And in no time they had deployed me to go and shut down another entrance. And for me, I was like, okay. And it was still a Friday, I had my kurta on, and went to just do this. And then I start realizing why that kind of shutdown was necessary is because it has been shut down for a majority of students who've never accessed or thought about accessing tertiary education. Remember, young people in tertiary only represent like 6% of young people. The majority are still excluded outside, don't know where to access potential opportunities. Now there's been a good push to get TVETs and colleges going where we can train people, but there's still a big mismatch. And so that fees must fall generation, it really showcased the kind of courage and character that I think the 1976 generation showed us. And it's what I've tried to live up to for a while now, because we learned through that moment that you didn't matter your political affiliation and the t-shirts you were wearing. We were able to sit on the table. EFF was there, ANC Youth League was there, the PRA Alliance. You had other formations at the table. Even some privileged students who said, we agree with this. And we were working towards a common goal, and that was free, quality, decolonized education. Unfortunately, campuses today are still facing that.
Yes.
I met some young SRC members who are saying it's gotten even worse to the extent where their own rights to express, and you think of university as a space where those freedoms are protected. There's an entire riot squad at WITS now with full gear on campus, ready to go at any point, because they're trying to limit the ability. And this is when authority actually becomes very regressive. Instead of saying, like, let's engage, what are the solutions to solve the problem? Our universities have also become spaces in which it entrenches the status quo. And that's my worry, is that should be the space where you're innovating the ideas to solve. And so the establishment as a whole, you can speak about the ANC in the Western Cape, the same problems with the DA, but as a whole, the establishment represents a failure to deliver and live up to its promise, because a lot of the people who exist in that establishment category have not checked their privilege enough to live and experience what the ordinary South African feels.
I wanted to get the question, maybe we'll try and squeeze it in the next segment, about Minister of Basic Education, Siviwe Gwagube, talking about entrepreneurship to be introduced as a subject. We will touch on that in a bit after the break. And we're also going to be discussing some of the social ills, most importantly, gender-based violence, and why that scourge, this pandemic, continues to be rife, especially amongst the youth of our country. Do stay tuned. Come back to this Youth Day panel discussion. Bilqees, Irfaan, you guys got 1 minute just to answer this question. The entrepreneurship being introduced into the curriculum by Minister Siviwe Gwagube. She says this is to counter the possibility of that pupil not getting into university. Just your comment on that in 1 minute.
I think it's a long time coming. This should have happened forever ago. When I was in primary school, we had Entrepreneurship Day, and that was as little 7 and 8-year-old kids. So it should have been done then. So I'm really happy that this will be introduced into the curriculum.
Okay. Irfaan?
I think there's good intent. I don't think the introduction of this subject in its, with good intent is great, but what are we doing to actually structurally change the system and the economy as it stands? Because you can have the skills to be an entrepreneur, and it's difficult skills that you grow with, but if you don't have access, if you don't have capital, if you don't have the market and mentorship you need, then that's obviously going to keep excluding you. I know the conversation has been about entrepreneurship, and we must implement and develop the skills. But I don't think structurally we're having a conversation that's really going to help that same young person who was trained to go and actually build a business for themselves. So that's my concern about this.
I think I wish I had more time to go ahead and discuss this, but we want to touch on an important part. Bilqees, as the female representative on this panel, when it comes to gender-based violence, when you look at what happened with Uyanene in 2019, it sparked a whole new wave of gender-based violence and the question with regards to it. And as men like myself and Irfaan on this panel, we should be doing more to protect our female compatriots in this country. And unfortunately, we haven't done it because there is a gap that we are looking to government and asking, what is it that you are doing to allow that you can sign these anti-gender-based violence bills you can sign it into act. Everything can happen We are 1.5 months from Women's Month, and yet the women in this country do not feel protected, especially when it comes to youth. And this is where the concern is. And it's a rightful concern because this is a pandemic we are going through right now.
Well, when to begin with gender-based violence, I am not sure where the beginning and the end is really. It's so pervasive in society, amongst youth, amongst all demographics, all age groups. And I'm glad we're having these sort of discussions, but it always seems to be discussions. And it's just discussions and more discussions about it, even with government, even with NGOs and civil society spaces. We're all advocating online. We're attending marches and rallies. And when it comes down to holding criminals accountable, the criminal justice system fails us. There's a backlog of DNA samples with SAPS, and it's in the thousands at the moment. We don't know when perpetrators will receive the justice that they deserve, and we don't know when victims would have even a modicum of integrity restored to them, their families. It's just, it's a very personal thing, gender-based violence, for me, because I've always been advocating for gender-based violence. And I want to particularly address the Muslim community and how we always cover up for perpetrators of gender-based violence in our communities, in society. We let them off the hook. These are people we know, our neighbors, our family members, religious leaders. It's not addressed at the masjid. If it is, it's in hush-hush tones. And this is something that we need to break, because most recently there was a case where a young woman came forward and she said that she was assaulted along with many other girls in her madrasa, and the perpetrator is still on the loose. He has not been arrested, there's been no charges laid, and we as a society, as an ummah, are responsible for bringing this person to justice. And I haven't seen anything. And when you ask questions, you're again brought up against a wall. And these are young people. The person, the victim in question, or the survivor in question, it began when she was 6 years old. And she's now in her 20s. So how many other girls in the system were faced with this thing to grapple with? And it's also a taboo subject when you bring it up with our mothers, with our grandmothers. Even our fathers don't know how to address it. I was very lucky in that my dad always, very kind-hearted. My dad was just never harsh in any way. So for us as sisters, as young girls, and in our household, it was confronting this was a shock. When we were out in the real world, so to speak, we were insulated. And then we were confronted with it at every angle. And I really think the justice system needs an overhaul. We have the National Strategic Plan for Gender-Based Violence that was supposed to have been implemented. There was supposed to be the registry that was supposed to have made public earlier this year. And there's no answers. When it comes to delivering, there's always just promises, but there's no accountability and no delivering on those promises. Yeah.
Irfaan, Bilqees brings up an important part there, addressing it within us as the Muslim community, because it can't be taboo anymore. We need to talk about it. And then the second part to this question, Irfaan, is the justice system, because I heard Advocate Shamila Batoy last week said it's being captured by, and I'm going to quote this, corrupt individuals. Surely that shouldn't be the excuse. We have to have a working NPA in order to make sure that the victims, and just when you see what happened with the Omatosa trial, and the fact that we are still having the hashtag justice for Kwekwe, this is a disgrace.
Yeah. In other parts of the world, you'd sign your resignation immediately because of the public outcry and the public shame that you'll feel. And so I want to echo the point that it is a societal problem. It's not just a governmental one or an institutional one. It's whole of society. And I think it's a subset of just decay of where society has been led over so many years. Because one, GBV is not a woman's issue. As like you mentioned, men have to take ownership of the fact that they are responsible for their behavior and must account for that. and the same cases that, Bilqees speaks about, we've not socialized our institutions, whether it's madrasas or mosques or sports teams and community clubs or whatever, towards having those conversations. And it ties into it intersects with other problems, the economy, mental health, etc., etc. Yes. And this is the product, and the end product is that we have such a violent society that has no moral fabric to say this is wrong as a person. I should never have actually taken out and it's not just physical violence, it's violence of all types. And, we can't attribute just one type of violence to this problem. I think challenging the stigma is important because if we don't start having those conversations everywhere we go, we're going to keep finding more people who are victims being silenced about this. You speak about the justice system, and I agree with you. I think we've spoken about reforms, and it at a very basic level, from a magistrate's office all the way up. You're seeing the Concord being used as part of political ploys because, politicians don't want to resolve things the way they should because they're also often incompetent to do so within parliament or other legislatures. And so now we're sitting with a problem where your judiciary has this influx of so many different types of cases. The NPA, for example, where's the cases brought forward, not just the GBV cases, stuff from the R1 million spent on the Zondo trials, So those commissions should have brought out and allowed us to hold accountable people who have done wrong to society. We're now seeing them walk freely, still living their best lives with the Gucci shoes and everything. And that's a worry. Is that what we want of a society? I don't certainly want it. I don't want it for my children, and I don't want it for their grandchildren, for my grandchildren. And that is a call to action, in fact, for all of us to say, if we're saying that's the case, what do we do to stop it? And that starts from a personal perspective. Then it's the family perspective and your communities. You can't remain so apathetic and nonchalant about these problems. They are too deep for us to let go of, and this country is too precious for us to just decide that it's up to the people who are doing wrong upon us to continue doing it.
I couldn't agree more there. Bilqees, we've just got about 2 minutes, so I'm going to ask you this as a 1 minute each question. Drug abuse, mental health, gender-based violence, it's all intertwined because once drugs starts getting used, mental health issues start getting affected. And then, of course, gender-based violence comes in. We see that a lot with the youth. This, of course, starts from unemployment not being addressed. The fact that this very same individual, this young individual, cannot get that. This happens. And, of course, each society, each individual has certain issues which talks to that. And the environment speaks to that. I know we can talk of government, but I think holistically, can South Africa's society save the youth from these social ills that we are experiencing right now?
I think the youth realizes now that the youth has to save themselves because it's been made clear to us that it's a dog-eat-dog world and no one is willing to step up, and so the youth has to step up for ourselves and protect ourselves. And that's why we have instances where people are committing suicide, resorting to drug abuse, gender-based violence. It's part and parcel of the bigger issue, which is that the system has made us angry. And that anger has no outlet. And when that anger has no outlet, our talents have no outlet, we have no creative output, we're not able to earn an income, that anger turns into anarchy. And from there, it's inevitable that there are going to be social ills, and it's just a vicious cycle over and over again. Substance abuse is just at the tip of the iceberg. And it's not to say that substance abuse leads particularly to gender-based violence, because that's something we just need to separate. Because a lot of people use that as a scapegoat, saying that, oh, it's because of substance abuse.
Toxic masculinity is one of the reasons why also, yes.
Yeah, toxic masculinity as well. It's just that when we address gender-based violence, we, in the movement, we don't want to address toxic masculinity. We feel like, why is it our responsibility to address toxic masculinity? And we feel like that is our male counterparts' responsibility to address amongst themselves.
Irfaan, 1 minute. Anger leading to anarchy. Bilqees mentions it. Bullying, suicide, depression. That's all leading into that.
100%. I serve on the board of Nishtara Drug and Rehab Center, and you find young people from in their early teens already hooked on drugs and other forms of addictions, including sex, including alcohol, all the things that you think that are not being carried out by young people, and that's a reality. My take is that we need to stop just doing awareness campaigns. All of us have at least an understanding that this is happening. Rather spend the money on that awareness and fund the rehab center that's actually helping, fund the call center that's actually supporting, giving psychological support and mental health support to a person in need. Fund those programs that are actually helping people and directly impacting lives. I know it comes from a good place to want to create awareness and do good in that way, but the real change is in the non-sexy stuff. And that's those organizations who are often not paid enough to do the work, and they themselves are facing such heavy weights on their shoulders. That resources that you have to spend it there, because that's where it counts, and that's where potentially you're actually saving a life and changing that young person on a different trajectory. So I'll end with that point to say that there's a lot more that can be done in that space.
Well, after the break, we're going to be talking youth within political and civic society activism. The conversation wraps up after the break. Welcome back. Now, according to the latest parliamentary stats, young people within parliament, you have 74 people that are under the age of 30 years old and 20 to 25 people under the age of 40 years old. What we have seen is quite a rise in the number of members of parliament that are being represented within the youth. Irfaan, I want to start off with you because I know you've been very deep with political activism. And is this number something that, when you look at it, it's something different that we have maybe seen in the previous 6 administrations?
It is something different. Perhaps the first one was the most inspiring because, you had the same young people who fought in struggle, who were very young when they took office. I think there is a shift back, a small shift, albeit, but I don't think I'm fully supportive of the fact that just young people is enough. The quality and the ideas of those young people matter. And so it's not, I've never just been an advocate for young people. I know I say let young people lead, and I'll always back that. But the type of young people we have to lead is important as well, because you can't go to a parliament and sleep. You can't just earn a very good salary and not put one bill to the table, private member's bill that advocates for young people. To watch you in committees and you've said nothing to actually drive this systemic change we're speaking about. So I worry that it's good to we need more diversity, particularly amongst young people, but we're not at the point yet where we're actually willing to critique and say, but the quality of that, the substance that person brings is important as well, because you're occupying a space. If you're occupying it simply to be a young person and look good, you're not doing the job, because there are millions of youth waiting and hoping that you represent their voices who would never be able to access that institution. And so I am worried, slightly hopeful that more young people are taking interest in politics. And so there's at least from my personal point of view, I'm hoping that I can also get more young people to occupy and I can get them into office very soon.
Bilqees, the numbers here of 74 people under 30 and of course 20 to 25 people under 40. It's lovely to say we've got, so the aesthetics part of having youth in parliament, it's all beautiful. Irfaan mentions the committees. The committees is where the big decisions are made. And if the youth are not allowed to speak on these committees, and I'm specifically speaking of members of parliament, if they're not allowed to make that difference, then it's just another talk shop for the youth to speak, but the actions are not being implemented.
Well, the youth have always been an accessory when it comes to politics. We're used sort of to an extent as a huge demographic, but we're made up of caregivers, we're made up of innovators, we're made up of academics, teachers, students. It's a host, but we put under the umbrella term youth. And it just takes away our plurality, our multitudes, and it really reduces us to something very simplistic. And that's really not represented at all in Parliament. and we're not taken seriously, and we're definitely not in leadership positions. If we are perhaps consulted and allowed to maybe talk here and there, it's seems to be also like, like you said, a talk shop, but definitely not in decision making. And it's really a travesty, because just because we're youth doesn't mean we're inexperienced youth. And the amount of lived reality that many youth have is really, I think, it can surpass most people who have had, most elders who have had a very simplistic, maybe perhaps mediocre life.
Irfaan, when I look at governance in this country, when I look at the way it's been set up, every president in this country has been either over 60 or, God forbid, over 70. Are we ever going to come to a time where, I'm not saying that this president has to be 30, 35, but even somebody bordering around 40, are we ever going to see that? Because the youth are looking at a leader that speaks to them. Unfortunately, we don't have that. Yes, you have Minister Siviwe Gwagube in basic education, or you've got certain portfolios that are having them maybe as, Asha Saropan, who sits in Treasury, he's one of the deputy ministers, but somebody holding a very key position. Unfortunately, the governance structure of this country is not allowing that, and it's the youth that are looking and saying, yes, once again, it's pensioners holding positions that have absolutely no idea about the reality that we live in.
I think you're right, and kudos to the DA for having fielded candidates who are much younger than the majority of the cabinet. But the ANC has also put forward a few of the deputy ministers are young. I think from a governance level, and from a governance perspective, we won't see that reality until we change political culture. The way our system is designed, you vote for a party, the party decides who they send to these various institutions, etc. And unless you change the culture within those organizations, within even our body politic as a whole, you won't see that end result. And so when people ask, why aren't young people voting? I don't think that's necessarily the right question. It's why aren't those parties actually appealing to those young people to say, I'd be willing to vote for you, and I have the confidence that you are the right leader that I can support and back. And we really have to instill political understanding how the system works into everyday citizens' lives. And that's why I do this type of work now. Sure. But I think it's beyond that. It's the way you interact with politics has become soured. You see this leader, you watch the TV where you see parliamentary channel where people are sleeping. It's been energized now with a lot of different candidates across party lines who actually I watch with earnest because I like what they say. There's members in the EFF who are so clear in their articulation, and Makashule Ghana from Rise Mzansi as well, who's been pushing different narratives, particularly for himself around gambling. There are people who are doing the job, but a bulk of them are not. And so that sends a signal to the rest of the young people in society watching that they're not serious about this. They're not serious about our lives. They're just happy to earn a good salary. So yeah, I think that's where I leave the governance question. Whether we'll get that president is up to the society. I always ask whether or not, if you are willing to get, if you are as a voter yourself, Fahraaz, will be willing to vote for a president who is 35. And that's where the conversation must start. Are you willing? Who's that person in your mind? Because if that's not a picture that you can paint or imagine, you already have the problem.
Bilqees, Irfaan, we've just got one last question, 1 minute to each of you. Come next year, 2026, where it is going to be 50 years since that uprising, surely we don't want to be having this conversation again.
No, we definitely don't want to be having this conversation again, but I fear that we will. Because until a meritocracy is not undermined by bureaucracy and tokenism and nepotism, we'll still be in the same situation.
Irfaan?
I think the future is here already. It's 22 years old, it's black, it's trying to achieve an education. And I have the fortune of speaking to Intate Seth Mazibuko, for example. And yes, this week when I interviewed him, who was 15 years old, elected to the Action Committee of the 1976 protest and uprising. And he said to us that next year is where his generation is going to sit and hand over the batons to us and the stones, because he wants us to start not throwing stones, but building with stones. And I think that for me is symbolic, because I think it will be a shift in how young people really take charge of this country and start doing the right thing, to build instead of burn.
Irfaan, Bilqees, absolute pleasure. I wish we had more time. So much to speak about. Unfortunately, we only have 1 hour for this conversation, but it's been an absolute pleasure hosting both of you. Assalamu alaikum to both of you.
Wa alaikum assalam.
That is Irfaan Mangera, social and political activist, and Bilqees Akoodie, lawyer and activist. That's all we have for you here on Hilaal TV. We're back tomorrow with News in Focus. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.